Thank you for having me. My name is Byron Phillips, and I'm currently a software tester, and I'm changing my career to run a media company. So why create a short film? Initially, I wasn't going to. I was part of a project whereby I was working with a number of people that they had an idea of a short film, but since COVID hit, that was put on hold. And during that time, I've literally been trying to increase my skill set and improve my technical ability. And one of the areas that I felt that I hadn't done much in was shooting in low light. Now, what I thought is that I'll create a short story around that premise of me investigating and what would be required to fulfill that. So that's where the premise of the short story came from, was that I hadn't shot in low light before, and I thought, what would happen if I just used the mobile phone as a as the main light? What would be the technical requirements or methods that I would need to use to make that image look reasonably good? Because it's not something that I tackled before, and that is where the premise of the short story came from. It was more to fill a technical requirement or improve my skill set at that, rather than the actual narrative itself, which is why the first part wasn't very good story wise. It was more of a case of I wanted to see how I could shoot in low light rather than does the story really work. Now, that was fixed in part 2, but the only reason why part 2 exists is because part 1, the ending, was really bad, and I wasn't happy with that. Now, originally, it was meant to be one of two scenarios. I thought, one, I'll get murdered, or the second one would be more humorous. And I thought I'll go with the humor because I watched a lot of short films, and you know, I didn't want to go down the same path of it always being the case of, oh, the person got murdered again. So I thought, right, let's inject some comedy into it. But when it came to the editing, um, it just didn't fit. It was awful. I didn't get the mix right between the first part and the ending, so it just clashed. So that's why you see me walk out. So I thought, right, okay, the second part will be much better, and I put more emphasis on what was the threat, and having to go back into the flat because it's on the first floor, so I couldn't exactly jump because it was pitch black. I had nothing on my feet, and so it just carried on from there. But I made sure that the actual narrative was a lot better. It was still a simple concept, but I thought that that was the one part that suffered with the first one. Planning, well, there was no planning for the first part. The only thing that I was concerned about at that time was how to fulfill a technical ability, and in order to do that, I was like, right, okay, let's get from the bedroom to the kitchen, and what shot list do I need? So rather than writing that down and creating a shot list, I used the mobile phone, and I literally did a very basic shot list using the camera on the phone to get the right angles and everything. So that was my planning. So that I did that over a period of, I think it was just only an afternoon, and I sat down. Well, I didn't sit down. I literally went through the bedroom, the hallway, and into the kitchen, and I did the shot list using the phone. So that was really good because that helped. That had a visual aid, and when it came to then actually shooting the first part, I knew exactly what I needed to do because I could use the mobile phone as a reference, and then any issues lighting wise I could fix then on the night. So I did the initial planning in the day, and then it was more a case of then that was what I followed then in the night. The second part, it was roughly the same thing. I still used the camera to do the shot list, but I put more emphasis on the narrative. So I wrote that part down on what I wanted to happen, And then, so I knew that I was out on the balcony, and then I had to come back into the kitchen, not the kitchen, sorry, the living room. And it's at this point that is where I met my fate. Now, it was only until right at the very end where I thought, do you know what would be really good is that if it went to the morning after, and you see a shot of me in the clothes that I was wearing, but it's not actually me, it's the person that killed me, and then you hear my partner come in. So that was an afterthought again. So you really need to pay attention to the story itself, because sometimes it can be a nightmare if you haven't got that in place already. So what lighting did I use? This was, like I said before, this was meant to be very, very basic. And watching the film Lights Out, I think I never remember the name, but it's YouTube, it's Pony Smasher. One of the things that he was saying is that when he was using the flashlight, there was someone walking around with a bounce card that was out of view of the camera. So I thought that would be a good way of actually dealing with the lighting. So when you see me come out at certain places, like there was a shot of me coming out from the bedroom to the hall, the camera's in front of, well, is placed where it is, and then I have a bounce card behind it. So the light from the actual phone is being reflected back, so that was helping with a lot of the shots. And I did that in certain places, so whereby you couldn't see the actual angle, but if there was a point where I was walking from the bedroom into the living room, that bounce card was then placed in the hallway, so as I turned and moved, you would see a little bit of the light come back. That worked out really well, and I was really pleased. Actually, I was surprised how much ambient light. Now, usually I would use a light meter in the day to get the correct exposure, but I didn't use the light meter at all, because one, the mobile phone, once it's at its max brightness, there's not a lot you can do with that. And in the absence of light, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't putting anything back in, so that's why I didn't use the light meter at all. It was literally being very, very simple in what I wanted to use, and that was literally the bounce card and the actual light meter, not the light meter, but the mobile phone. The second film, the second part, I actually stopped using the bounce card, and it was watching a tutorial on Film Riot actually. And what they did was they had a scene where the gentleman was holding up a mobile phone, and there was a lot of light, well, not so much light, but enough to illuminate the face. And what they were doing was they were getting a small, like aperture M9, and they were placing it by the camera so that you couldn't see it because the camera was pointing this way, and then that was on the lower setting, and then that was providing enough fill on the face and the claws for it to simulate that. So that is largely what I'd done in the second part, and that made it easier with some of the shots, especially when you're looking from further away and you can see more of my face. You would never be able to do that if it wasn't for that light. So that, by using that technique, it opened me up for a number of shots that wouldn't have existed had I not used that method. So that was really good to have, and that is the main thing that I'd done. The only difference is when I was out on the balcony, I did add some additional small lights positioned in one or two areas, and I did use the bounce card for that. And my thinking with that is that nobody knows what's around this area anyway, but it's obviously I'm in a flat and there's going to be ambient light surrounding me because of adjacent buildings. So I thought, right, okay, I'll put some additional lights, very, very small lamps, and these are, I think you can plug them in, and they're USB powered. So they came in handy, and they were just enough to provide a little bit of fill, and that worked out okay. So lighting wise, there was very, very little. It was literally only the mobile phone, the aperture M9, and the bounce cards, and I think I used the M9 again when it was the first part of the bedroom scene. So where you see me laying down, I've actually got the M9 up on the curtain pole, and that is coming down. That's again, I think it's not at the lowest setting, but it was enough just to make it believable that there was ambient light coming from the window, and also you obviously had the flame, but that wasn't providing much light anyway on my face. It was enough, but it was pretty dark, so that was just enough to lift the image up, and yeah, that worked really well. Sound. Sound is a nightmare, actually. I didn't realize how much sound makes up for everything. I mean, it wasn't until I finished the first part. A lot of the editing was based around the sound, and I got a lot of my ambient noises from Epidemic Sound, but a lot of it was recorded using the shotgun mic and the H6 zoom. And what I was doing was I would like record the room tone and all those things. So in the day, I think it was quite windy, so I just set the actual microphone by the window where the candle would have been, and I just let that record for a little bit. So it was just getting those little things, and the door closing and the door being slammed, that was all recorded using that. So I did a lot of thought, but it was only after the actual film was shot. Now, one of the big mistakes that I made was not capturing enough audio during the shooting during the first part. Now, I made up for that in the second film, like recording the fridge, because the fridge makes a slight buzzing noise, and as you walk past the boiler, that makes a clicking noise, and that's got a tone. So those small things really help, because what I was finding was when I was cutting bits of the sound out and it was dead flat, it felt unnatural. So it's surprising how much weight the room tone makes, and trying to get everything leveled off. One of the things that I'm really crap with is actually sound editing. Now, it took a long time for me to, I do things too quiet, and I don't know why I was doing that, but I did make myself a bit braver. I increased the levels, and the way that I'd done that was once I'd finished the film, I exported it. I listened to it on the mobile phone and it seemed fine. Listened to it on the headphones and it seemed fine. And then I was driving, I was in the car, and I thought I would quickly listen to it as I'm driving, and I couldn't hear a bloody thing. It was too low. So that just goes to show, obviously not going to be while you're driving, but it was a big kick in the teeth for me, because I was just like, it is not loud enough. And then when I went back on Netflix and Amazon Prime and I was listening to other shows, I was like, yeah, I'm too quiet. I'm way too quiet. So I had to really go back, look at some YouTube stuff and really get those audio levels back up, because it was just far too quiet. And yeah, that was a big learning curve. The gear used, aside from, there was quite a lot actually, surprisingly. So I'll just go through the basics of everything that I'd done. So the camera that I used was the Lumix G7. Everything was shot in 4K. The microphone is a Synco Mic D2. The recorder is the actual H6 zoom. I said that previously and I forgot. Everything else, then I've got like a monitor and a wireless follow focus, and that was surprisingly helpful, because when you're quite far back, I was having to use the t-shirt that I was using was reflecting a lot, so that was giving it really good contrast. So when I was actually using the monitor and using the wireless follow focus, I could go to the position that I wanted and use the rig itself, and then that would get focus. Now the areas where I buggered that up was, especially I used a jib, and I did a makeshift rig whereby the slide that I got was using an arm, and that was pushing the jib up. So that's how that bit was automated. The problem was I didn't get the focus right. it was nice in focus when you got to the end of the corridor, but it was soft at the start, and that's the one area that really bugs me. Now, because I'd done so many reshoots up until that point, I was kind of getting done with it, so that's why that bit wasn't reshot. The other equipment, so I used a jib for that, the microphone, the camera, obviously a tripod. Now the tripod is on dolly wheels, and the base of that, I've got a slider, and on that there are 3 carriages, and the camera is positioned on one, the audio equipment is positioned on the second carriage, and then the actual monitor is actually sat on the 3rd carriage, and this allows me to make micro adjustments. So if I've got the actual camera set up where I want it, but it needs to be 2 or 3 inches over to the left or right, I could actually just undo the knob and then move that carriage over. So it was fantastic in that regards. I made that myself, so I bought a few sliders a while back and I just wasn't using them, so that's why I decided I need a good mobile base, and it's been fantastic actually. So that's worked out really, really well. It has, and I've been really, really pleased with that. The other equipment, so lighting was just the mobile phone. There was no key light, so I wasn't using my Fort R150. The rest were just bounce cards that I'd made. So I'd made a V flat, so that is as nearly as tall as me actually, and one side you've got the white cork board, and then on the other side then it's just black cards, so that provides either the bounce or the negative fill, and they're working out really well. So I've made another one of those, so one's half the height and then one's the full height. You can get tutorials online for that. The other thing that I'd done was I made a dolly, and that was for the last shot. That needs to be fixed and repaired because it's squeaking, so a lot of the audio ought to be cut out for that, but it's actually worked out well. I think it cost me about 60 quid to make in the end, and it does work really, really well. And I've got the Movie Maker gear slider, and that's on quite a big track, and that was just strong enough to push that slide in short end, the dolly short end. So I had that positioned in the hallway, and I was using that motorized slider to actually push it the length of the actual track, which were PVC piping. And again, it's something that I got from Pony Smasher. He calls it the shitty dolly. So I literally used that, and that was able then for me to have stand in this position while that was dollying in. So that worked out really well. I just got to fix it, I have, because there's 1 or 2 things that need solving. And what else did I use? There was that. Did I make anything else? I don't think I did. It was the bare essentials. I say the bare essentials. All this gear has cost me a lot. The one thing that, as much as I love the G7, I think in the future, once the clients start coming in and that work needs to be improved, I probably will upgrade the camera, but the rest of it has worked out really well. So the editing software, this was done on DaVinci Resolve 16, and that's been fantastic. I absolutely love it. So all the effects were done within that. This time I added a film damage look on the second part, and that was a plugin that's within DaVinci Resolve. The fusion, now that's the bit that took me a while, is trying to make it convincing enough, because when I did my initial tests of the Demon Eyes, one of the things that it just looked crap. I was really, really disappointed, and I thought, I'm not going to be able to do this. So this is why the second part has taken so long, because there's so many bits in between that need to be done. And I'd shot the bit where the dolly was coming in, and then obviously you see me standing here with the Demon Eyes again. And that took a while, because it was easier to do the Demon Eyes when it was in a dark setting. You could get away with it a bit more. But actually in the lighted areas, it had to be a lot better. And For my first attempt, I'm really happy with how it worked well. But what I'm finding is the machine that I've got to do this does need beefing up, because if I'm going to do anything in Fusion, I've only got 8 gig of RAM and it was struggling. So for me, it's a fantastic bit of kit to have, but I do need to beef my machine up. So the workflow for that, I think once all the footage is there, I then transcode that so that the actual machine can actually play that back smoothly. I do the main cuts of how I want everything in, so I don't do any color grading at that point. I basically get the film done, and this was split into different sections, so I focused on the balcony first, then the second section was the kitchen down to the hallway, and then the third section then was the actual in the living room itself. So they were split into 3 different areas and to their own timelines, and I just made sure that the editing I was happy in each area, and once that was done, they were all made into one big timeline at the end, and it was rendered out. So the rendering was fine, and that handled it fine. But I'm finding Fusion is very, very resource hungry, so be very mindful if you're going to be using DaVinci Resolve. That does require a good 16 to 32 gig, and it also requires a good amount of graphics card as well. But you can get away with it, and I certainly did with this, and I was pleased with the result. Well, thank you for having me. I hope this was good. Yeah, it has been brilliant. Thank you. Right, so this is not a documentary, but I am working on a documentary that I'm shooting tomorrow, and one of the things that I've been practicing with is the actual lighting and everything, but I also needed to do a video on the actual short film. Of course, I forgot myself. So one of the things that I wanted to do was kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So I've been spending most of the day setting this up, getting the lighting right and everything, but I also wanted to actually fulfill this and actually show you guys how I done the actual 2 short films. So I thought it'd be interesting to try make it into a documentary style and kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope that was beneficial. Obviously, I'm Byron Phillips, as you know, and yeah, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.